Right, welcome back. Let's get to the story that we're asking you about as well this morning. The Democratic Alliance and the Freedom Front Plus have filed papers at the Gauteng High Court they're going to file papers at the High Court to challenge the constitutionality of Government's Disaster Management Act. The political parties say certain regulations under the national lockdown are unconstitutional and is damaging South Africa's already fragile economy. Joining us to discuss this court action is Rehana Khan Parker from RKP Attorneys. My tongue is in a knot this morning. Rehana, thanks for joining. It's great to have you on the show.
Good morning. Thank you. And thank you to the listeners as well.
So let's talk to DA Interim Leader John Steenhuisen, has said, amongst other things, that the Act is not valid and that they will be asking the court to apply the same oversight provisions to the state of disaster as a state of emergency. And he said because without this oversight, petty authoritarians hopped up on power and are allowed to run amok. So talk to us about your opinion regarding, firstly, the statement and the consideration with regard to the law.
Yes, I need to correct you. The court action was brought yesterday. I've seen the papers last night.
Excellent, thank you.
In the Gauteng High Court. So the court action by the DA has already been launched. And yes, they are questioning, first of all, the irrationality of the regulations. That is the first part of the court application. And then, of course, they do in their papers make reference to the fact that they will be launching a separate constitutional court challenge with regard to the Disaster Management Act. So when it comes to the issue of irrationality, the DA is saying that yes, the lockdown provisions were irrational. They were not properly considered. And they are looking specifically in their papers, which I read last night, with regard to the movement of people. That is the curfew between, the night curfew, if for the lack of a better word. And then, of course, it is in relation to certain transport provisions, as well as the exercise time between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. And then, of course, the Table 1 in the regulations, the E20 provisions with regard to e-commerce. Now, what is interesting is that the Minister of Transport just last night signed off the regulation in respect of the nod in terms of allowing the e-commerce trade to continue.
Yeah.
What is interesting and what I find a bit amiss in the DA's application is that the DA concedes that they want the e-commerce, which has now been granted by the minister, save for the provisions as contained in the regulations regarding Regulation 26, that is with regard to alcohol, and Regulation 27 with regard to cigarettes. The ban on tobacco goods. So, yes, the application, so far as my view is concerned, is that it has been a bit too hasty. The president came onto television, apologized for certain oversight, which I must commend him for, and promised that we would be going into a relaxation in the next few weeks, and that the ministers would be addressing us as the days unfold.
Yeah.
So we already have the issue now that, there we have it, the Minister of Trade and Industry has already addressed the issue with regard to e-commerce. And I'm expecting in the next few days that the various other ministers would also be coming to the fore. When it comes to the issue with regard to the constitutionality, there's been a lot in the media with regard to that, saying that the National Coronavirus Command Council is acting on its own. Now, we need to understand that there is a distinction between a state of emergency and a state of a national disaster. The state of emergency is contained in Section 37 of our Constitution. And yes, the president at the time of the pandemic hitting South African shores certainly had to weigh up which of those provisions were best suited in the circumstances. Now, the state of emergency talks directly to civil unrest. It's a reminder of what happened under apartheid.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really truly applicable at that stage, and therefore the declaration of a state of disaster was a natural fit because it's a pandemic. Now, and this is where we have the different, I can call it reporting mechanisms or oversights that are being complained about. In the situation of having a state of emergency, yes, your parliament there is your oversight.
So
However,
do they have a case? Do they actually have a case? I mean, from what you're saying here, because, nothing about what we're going through is normal. And as you say, we're in a state of disaster. So is this normal? Do they really have a case to go to court on?
I do not believe they have a case. That is my personal view, and I say so for the following reasons. We are in unprecedented times. The president acted decisively. He chose a path with full knowledge that we're going to have an economic crisis. And he chose a path, and he did open up the various levels a week ago. However, coming to whether there is validity in the case of the DA, that is why we like South Africa. We have a constitutional democracy, a robust constitution, which allows for cases like as such, and especially with regard to the regulations, to be tested. We've had a case as such before the Constitutional Court at the very beginning of our lockdown, the HBR case. It was thrown out of court. Now, the comparison is between how many people have died as a result of COVID-19 as opposed to other risks, such as diabetes, fatalities on our roads and so forth. You cannot compare the two. One is a contagious disease, and the other one is something else. So I do not believe that the case is valid. So at most, it is premature.
What the DA and Steenhuisen has particularly put on the table and said that even though the president, and you alluded to it in your answer, came and addressed the nation this week and basically said that, yes, of course, e-commerce would be open. We'd need to be a bit more patient because lockdown level 3 would possibly begin at the beginning of June. And also there would be talk of easing the relaxation with exercise rules, which is also a part of the case they're taking. What John Steenhuisen has said when asked for comment on what the president he said it's too late. This is too little too late. We'd already started from a month ago asking the president and the NCC to start unlocking South Africa's economy because it is falling apart. And this is the reason that he's giving, that what they're doing is too late and that they are making laws and not actually negotiating or talking to anybody about that. Again, I ask you the same question. Will this hold in a court of law?
I still do not believe it will hold in a court of law. I totally disagree. The loss of lives, a loss of a life is a loss of a life, and you cannot compare that to an economic consideration. I'm an affected person as a legal practitioner. I'm not able to practice, but at the end of the day, what does matter is that we have a mass of ignorant South Africans. And how do we combat the further pandemic from increasing? And the numbers are going to increase. So a considered approach is the correct approach. And I firmly believe in that.
Yeah. So let's look forward now and sort of also look at the global perspective, because South Africa is not an island when it's coming to their reaction to coronavirus. We have seen many other countries around the world, and it doesn't matter what kind of a country, whether we're talking first world or third world, most countries have got some form of regulation taking place. I mean, do you know of any other country that is taking its president to court or its ruling party to court for the lockdown regulations or the regulations that have been put in place? Is this common practice, or is this something where we're thinking, I don't know, this is almost trying to politicize a pandemic that we're going through right now? So perhaps give us a global perspective if you have.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to look into that, but there haven't been many cases that I've seen in the international environment. Certainly not. So South Africa is different. We have a constitution, and that in fact entrenches the rule of law. So yes, I think South Africa is pretty much a country that thinks for itself, doesn't easily follow what happens internationally. I have not seen challenges of the kind that I have seen in the numerous court challenges over the past few weeks. And I think South Africa is correct. It must make a decision which domestically suits it. We have a unique set of circumstances, especially here in the province where I come from, which is the Western Cape. Opening up the levels too fast is going to result in a disaster.
Yeah. I mean, we also obviously are looking towards a lot of people speaking, and I'll go back to the whole issue of being political at a time like this and taking this issue and politicking and using it whichever regard in your favor to either get more votes or to, take on different political parties that, particularly when it comes to a time like this, maybe we should all be working on the same page as opposed to being on the opposite side of the scale with one another. Not that you're a political analyst, but I mean, taking these things to court. We've seen this happen and play out many, many times in South African politics. Is this just another example of politics at play?
Yes, well, the DA has been threatening for some time with regard to the court action. And what is so alarming is, at first, South Africans, pre-lockdown, pre-social distancing, was calling for, I remember the very first case, when it was reported in the media, there was this huge outcry, including the DA, when are we going into a lockdown? So we get presented with a lockdown, and with very strict measures, I must admit. And then that, of course, has a huge economic impact, which was expected. And all of a sudden now, it is that we need to just lift all those curfews and go back to normal with a total disregard. Politicking, unfortunately, is showing its ugly head. At the beginning, I do believe there was support, but economics drives, unfortunately, the politicking. And for me, it is who is the set of people that will be the most affected by a very early, complete opening. It's the most marginalized in our communities. And we know what the purpose of the stringent lockdown was to flatten the curve, get our health sector ready, because we are expecting the numbers to flow in.
Yeah. Which we're seeing on a daily basis with when the numbers are reported, the cases are getting higher, the death toll is getting higher. So these things are happening. One of the other issues that the DA is alluding to is the fact that there are going to be more loss of lives due to poverty and the economy falling and failing, as opposed to what coronavirus is going to do. Now, that's an argument that they're using as well in terms of their fight against this lockdown. Again, do you see, I mean, clearly there is validity in the statement because we're seeing the numbers coming out, but does this hold for an argument that, the economy, as opposed to controlling a virus and a pandemic and destroying an economy, drawing that balance? So this is, again, an argument that's being put forward.
It's a very difficult, and it's a very, I do agree, I cannot disagree with the DA in that respect. It is, we see it in the Western Cape, where the poverty is on our doorsteps. Funders have dried up who would normally form part of the funding pipeline, and hunger is going to kill more than the virus. Yes, that is certainly a consideration. But to just open up and say, let's go back to normal, and then face a health nightmare is a bigger problem for South Africa. So yes, our ministers are currently sitting, I do believe, with having to find the balance and respond to that specific, specific valid claim of the DA with regard to lots of lives as a result of lockdown and joblessness, as opposed to being a COVID-infected person.
We've asked this question to a lot of our viewers out there, and there have been quite a few different views coming through. And one that's cropped up is this turning into a race issue again? Because you're seeing the Freedom Front Plus, you're seeing the DA, and against the government of the Tay, which is the ANC, and the decisions that they're taking. And some people now talking to, here we go, it looks like a race issue playing out. Do you believe that that could be a scenario that we must look at? Or can we say, look, forget about race at a time like this. This is the situation.
I'd like to say, forget about race at a time like this. I'd really like to say it, but it comes up because we see who's the most marginalized. And I think the problem is that South Africa, our government, was not fully aware of the extent of the poverty. I believe poverty is what's going to kill people more. Hunger will certainly kill people more than the virus. And race, unfortunately, comes into that because we know the figures with regard to who's the most marginalized in that. So race does come into it, unfortunately.
Just finally, because we've spoken a lot to the DA, and joining this entire issue is the Freedom Front Plus, as we have mentioned. And again, what they are saying is, to quote what they're saying, is that they are going to ask the court to find that the government is abusing the Disaster Management Act 1, which I think you've spoken to. You have spoken to that act and what it's all about. And they're also saying that, you know, it's specific regulations that they are particularly fighting against. But again, what the government is doing, when we look at that act, are they doing anything wrong? I think that's the bottom line. That's how we end it. Are the government doing anything wrong when it comes to this act? Are they abusing it with what they're doing?
I do not believe that they are abusing it. I believe that, and they've decided on, as I said, not the state of emergency, probably because of the connotation that's attached to being in a state of emergency. They decided to go with the Disaster Management Act regulations. And yes, and there's been a huge outcry there about the National Coronavirus Command Council acting in secrecy, and that there's no oversight by Parliament. The Disaster Management Act doesn't require, in terms of the provisions of the Act, oversight by Parliament. So yes, whilst the perception out there is that we've got a president and his command council, which is essentially his cabinet, acting in secrecy, they have enacted regulations which are, and here admittedly, has certain layers of being in a state of emergency. The fact that they called in the South African National Defence Force, who acted very heavy-handedly at the very beginning. I've not heard in recent times. I think they've finally managed to get their act together, and I haven't heard of any outbursts of brutality by either the South African Police Forces or the South African National Defence Force.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Rehana Khan Parker, thanks so much for talking to us here on the programme. She's from RKP Attorneys, talking to us about the DA and the Freedom Front Plus's court action against the government's Disaster Management Act. They are saying that government are acting in the wrong way. They are abusing this particular act. But the law saying, as we heard from our attorney speaking to us, that they are not doing anything wrong. So we'll see how that plays out in the courts.